Wow. This is a cold Friday morning here in Colorado, and we're going to talk about stuff. There's an article and some data coming out that I saw in the LA Times. Americans have over 300,000 items. What? What do we do with that as we age? What is the stress? What is behind that? So stick with us while we have an incredible guest who's going to dive deep into the emotion, the passion, and the compassion associated with organizing and how we kind of work with that stuff as we age. But first, quick message from our sponsors.
This incredible show made possible by our wonderful sponsors: Assured Senior Living, love, it's what we do, and Serenity Engage, where care connects. Now, a brief message from Serenity Engage. Serenity connects aging service providers, older adults, and their loved ones in a single network. Our web, mobile, and smart assistance products power the network that enables real-time, HIPAA-compliant communication, collaboration, and education. When we care together, providers increase revenue and lower expenses, older adults receive better care, and family has greater peace of mind.
And we're back. And Cambria, I should have introduced you first. This is such an honor to have you on the show on top of our amazing guests. So, Cambria, thank you for joining us today.
Thank you so much for the invite. I'm really excited about being here to be a co-host. And also, I have so much tremendous respect for Beth Blacker on numerous fronts. So I'm just honored that I get to co-host with such a special guest.
And without any further ado, Beth, welcome and thank you for joining us here.
Thank you so much. And thanks, Cambria. Had we never met, I wouldn't be here today, right? It was through the Collaboration and Aging Conference. I think I responded to an email. I didn't even know, anything about you. And you responded so kindly and genuinely. So thank you.
Absolutely.
What a small world. I mean, just that's the power of connections. I think we were talking about it, Beth, right before the show, the power of connections. And so can you kind of tell us a little bit about, what that means for what you do and how you do it? Because you can, connections matter.
Connections really do matter. And, when we were talking before we started, I talked about how much compassion this really takes, and that unfortunately society looks at our service still as too much of a luxury and not a necessity. And especially when you think about seniors who are trying to navigate the idea of transitioning probably to some form of assisted living, that it's hard. It's a really hard process. And especially a lot of seniors that don't even have family or friends to help them. Maybe they never had children. Maybe they're estranged from them. It's a very, very lonely experience to navigate. And so we take our role really, really seriously. And, when I say we try and be the conduits for change from chaos to calm, that really is what is going on, not only internally for a lot of seniors, but also externally when they're facing the idea of having to downsize.
I guess, that seems, honestly, just sitting here right now thinking, 20 years from now or 30 years or whatever it may be, you need 10 years, right? 5. How do you even begin to start this process? And what exactly is it that you do for them throughout that, I guess, emotional, physical, like that whole transformation that's occurring?
Right. It takes a lot of patience, obviously. I always say whenever I'm speaking with seniors, doing a presentation, that you have to give yourself the space for grace. And that could be upwards of a couple of years to go through the lifetime of things that you've collected. And, you don't want to rush it, but at the same time, you don't want to necessarily dwell over every single item. It is, you can, if that's what it takes, but it's going to cost you a lot of time and money and energy, especially if you hire a company like ours. But we do have a lot of seniors that really can only handle working one-on-one. So that's why we always suggest start as early as possible and be very intentional, be very deliberate, give yourself the time and the space, and don't think that you can go all at it in one day or even a couple of days or even a couple of weeks, because again, it goes back to having collected a lifetime of memories, and I say it all the time, I'm 61 and I'm looking at more years behind me than ahead of me, I think. And I joke when I say, God help the universe if I live another 60 years. But, it's hard. It's very hard to think like you traveled, your kids did things, whatever it is that you've collected through the years, it's really hard to let go. It's a very emotional journey. So we just try and come in, with as much patience and compassion, but also a degree of ruthlessness because, why hire us if we're not
Right.
being ruthless on some level?
So, Beth, I have a question for you, a couple questions. One is there something in when you look back at your business, is if you had to say who is most, triggered to actually reach out and find you, is it normally the older adult themselves, or is it their children, or who's normally the person that reaches out to you traditionally?
I would say it really is divided between the person, the individual themselves, a family member, maybe a caregiver. Sometimes it's the assisted living community that they're in saying, they need help. They can't, there's no place for them to walk in their unit. But, it really does depend on the motivation, usually the motivation, and how, dare I say, desperate somebody might be to reach
Right.
directly. But I do. I mean, I've been participating in the Aging at Altitude Expo twice a year that takes place here in Boulder County, and the Daily Camera prints a guide for the expo, and I would say at least 75% of the people that find us from that expo, they're looking at the actual guide. So, these are people that are not maybe as tech savvy. They hold on to things, which is why they're calling me. And so, they're seeing the ad. And we actually had somebody recently whose handyman called me because he had seen the ad, and he was at a point where he's like, I can't help her anymore. There's nothing that I can do. So it usually takes some sort of breaking point, and it could be the individual themselves, the family member who's at their wit's end. I'm flying to Florida soon to help somebody who is, struggling after one of her parents died and just needs the extra set of hands. So that's what I'm going for.
And what is the ideal from the moment someone knows they've got a challenge, they realize they need a professional like yourself and your process to help walk them through? I know more time is always better, but how would you give us in three different sort of process chunks, if you will? One is the most ideal timeline, two is we can do it, and three is, yeah, we can do it, but it's not going to be pretty.
Right. The ideal timeline, if they're moving, I would say at least 6 months in advance. Somebody should be calling me and saying, this is what's going on. They're going from 4,000 square feet down to 400 square feet. And as you know, Cambria, most of the senior living communities have a list that they'll give the resident that are recommendations of what they truly need when they move into a much smaller space. Whether or not we can convince the client of that, that's a different story. I mean, we've had clients that absolutely refuse to believe that they want us to raise the ceiling, expand the walls, lower the floor. We can't do that, right? But sometimes they're adamant that they want to keep everything, and it's not our job to tell them no, you can't. I mean, we can try, we can certainly try, but if they want to move in with 2,000 square feet worth of stuff into 400 square feet, who are we to tell them that they can't? We can't start just taking things out of the house or we'll get arrested. But there has to be a negotiation. So, if it's going to be a particularly difficult process for somebody, they really do need to give themselves that amount of time, I believe. Have we done it in less time? Yeah. I mean, we've done it in one day with somebody who ended up in going into the hospital, then rehab. they thought they were going to come home from rehab. It's the tale as old as time, right? And then they ended up in assisted living, and they never get the time to be able to do it themselves. So suddenly family members, or even, me alone, is trying to figure out, well, what are the things that they're really going to want at assisted living? So it's really important to start thinking about this. I mean, I believe you should be downsizing constantly and editing your life constantly, not keeping the things that no longer serve you or
So can we unpack that a little bit there? That's interesting what you just said there. Can you unpack that a little more about the editing and downsizing your life kind of as you go? Because I think that when I heard that stat of 300,000 items for Americans, I was like, first off, I'm like, crap, with my family and kids, we got to be pretty dang close.
Oh,
and
yeah.
the second is, what you said really resonates with me, is like, okay, we need to start kind of what baby items that we forgot we had, right? Or things like that.
Right. Yeah. And that stat has been around for a while. It's probably more by now, quite frankly, even with the whole, decluttering movement that's taking place, especially since the pandemic.
Okay.
A lot of people collected a lot more during the pandemic because it was so easy to be at home. Well, not easy, but, we were at home and packages were arriving every day because what else did we have to do? And we've seen that. We've seen pandemic hoarding that took place, especially with a lot of seniors who were shut in. They didn't have anybody to really guide them and help them. But, as far as the editing process goes, I just don't believe we need multiples of things. How many spatulas do you need? How many sets of sheets do you need? How many pots and pans do you need? Me, I have one set of sheets, and that's because it forces me to wash them and put them right back on. They don't end up in a crumpled ball somewhere. And that way I don't even have to worry about, storage. Two is fine, but I don't think anybody really needs more than 2 sets of sheets, in my opinion. And that's just what I believe. And that's what I've done, pretty much all of my adult life, wherever I've lived. A bed can only have 2 sets of sheets, in any house that I've ever lived in. But, new old newspapers is something that we see a lot with seniors, piles and piles of newspaper. We have a client right now that we had to negotiate with her that any paper in the house, unless it was truly proven that it was a collector's item, like the day Kennedy got shot, the day that, whatever, the days in history were. If it's just been collecting in a pile, no, you don't need that, except maybe for packing. And even that, people don't use newspaper as much anymore because the ink rubs off on things and, that kind of thing. The multiples are the things that we really recommend getting rid of. Paper. Not just newspaper, but bills. We see a lot with seniors that they've saved bills and bank statements for many, many, many years. And there's no reason for it in this day and age. And I know there's the fear of losing it if we just stick with digital. But, as I often say, if the internet goes down indefinitely, we're all really screwed. I mean, so, you might as well just get out the bottle of whiskey and the bottle of pills and call it, we're done. So this worry about, right? I mean, seriously.
You're not wrong.
I know I'm not. We're really relying on the internet at this point. And, I don't know how we would function as a society. I do remember when they shut the internet down on 9/11 and, the world stopped. I mean, we all had to go home and just say, oh, well, there's nothing we can do. So that fear of not being able to touch it is what is so hard to overcome. They want to be able to touch it or see it. And if they can't touch it or see it, they feel like it no longer exists. So, we have to get really creative with ways to preserve the memories without it taking up so much physical space and mental space too, because clutter does affect us internally. It really, really does. And it goes around and round and round in circles.
And Beth, I think, the reason that, when we were connected, and I think what's coming through here is that, it's just stuff is different. You're different. And while my understanding is your clients span, it's not only seniors, but it has been primarily seniors. And this is an area that It's Just Stuff has really grown into and has been elevated as a leader because of just what you said. Because one, it's a process, and you've got a proven process of editing your life, understanding and helping people working with assisted living, as well as caregivers, to help really understand what is the list, what are the priorities, what do we really need to move into, and that's the process. And then you look at it as the other portion, which is, what is the psychological aspect of this, and not just what the child of the loved one wants or what the community wants, but really looking and seeing that senior as and respect them as they deserve. And working together with them to be able to meet the needs of what they need as to where they're going, and well as making sure that they're part of that process, which really is part of the journey of moving into this next phase of their life. So it's not just a service, it's actually a really helpful process in making that mental shift into my life is changing. What does that look like? And I need some more partners. And for those of us that are also either the loved one, right? So it's not just coming from us saying, Mom, you really need to do this. You don't need that thing. Or Francis saying, hey, you've got this 400 square foot room that you're moving into. These are the things you can do. All of a sudden it's Beth Blacker, expert at It's Just Stuff, partnering and giving the respect to the older adult who's going through the process. And all of a sudden that smooths all the edges, makes them feel seen and respected, and that they're in charge of something when everything else feels out of control. And that's what I've really received when I've been interacting with you and seeing your company and the outcomes that you've had, and which is what really drew us of how can we really craft that kind of insight that you've been able to bring to It's Just Stuff and apply that to other areas in our interactions with these key stakeholders, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that is exactly the point. I think, Cambria, you hit obviously what Beth, your passion comes through, and I think that's what's really important here is when you deal with people, it's a combination of doing the task, but also how do you bring that empathy, that emotion, and that connection to that person? Because I run across, my mom even has it. She's been on the podcast a couple times. Caregiver guilt, this guilt about making her mom move or her mom do this, or even though grandma's doing great because of all that stuff, but and I can't even imagine the guilt as a let's say an oldest daughter, which seems to be running a lot of these decisions here just because of what it is right now, of being like, all right, Mom, you're moving from your 3,000 square foot house to your, 500 square foot studio in, whatever, assisted independent memory, whatever it may be. Right. That's not an easy conversation, like that.
Yeah.
That all of a sudden that role reversal kicks in, that I'm like, man, I'm telling my mom what to do. And I don't like it. Like that kind of sucks. Right. But then you all of a sudden have, well, I'm a 90-year-old lady. You don't need to tell me what to do. I know how to do this. But Mom, you haven't done it for years. It's fine. Like, it's, and so I agree with Cambria. We need to have these, I want to say buffers, but these professionals that can come in and go, hey, I'm neutral here. Let's find this path that we're both successful on. Right. So the family can be the family, right? We don't need, there's already enough stress on aging, and any tool that we can have that drops that stress, that is the most important thing to me, because our job as providers and educators is we have to take care of the family as much as that person. And I think I can feel that that's a part of what you do at your heart. I think that's really important.
Yeah, it's really, I think that it's just ingrained in me, maybe because I had an incredibly close relationship with my grandparents. And I never understood, even when I was growing up, how disrespected elders were back then even. And it didn't make any sense to me because I had amazing grandparents who I loved being around. I so enjoyed, spending Saturday nights at their house and, sleeping over, and, my grandmother would take me to my favorite restaurant and let me go to the drugstore and, get, my favorite candy or whatever. And yeah, did she spoil me? Sure, of course. But at the same time, I had such a deep respect for her as somebody who had lived many years more than me and had, advice to give me. And I was willing to listen to her stories. And I think that that's the biggest problem that we have in society today, that nobody really wants to listen to anybody anymore. So, I think that it just does come down to being willing to really have those open ears and listening to their pain points and understanding why this is going to be so very hard for them. And it, I've had enough transitions in my life, where maybe I went from living in a big house to a small dorm room to a small apartment in New York City. But then suddenly the next 20, 30 years of my life, I was living in the 4,000 square foot house with, the big lanai and the pool and all of that. But then I go through my second divorce and I'm suddenly now living in 700 square feet again. But I can do it because I understand it is just stuff. It really is to me. And my kids will not even probably have to ever come. I hope they'll come if I have to transition to assisted living, but they probably wouldn't have to. They probably wouldn't have to. They probably don't want to, but I don't know if I want them to.
Yeah.
It
goes both ways.
Exactly. It's really interesting. Francis and I and Catherine Wells had the opportunity to sit down with Jody Waterhouse before the end of the year. And you hit on something with your grandparents. And she was sharing as people are going through with medical school, right? And getting their degrees and becoming doctors and dentists and really coming out to lead practices and treat our seniors. She shared a really interesting stat that the majority of I keep wanting to say kids, which is not good, but the majority of the graduates or people going through these programs do not have a senior or an older adult as part of their everyday life or in their circle. And so the interactions when they're actually treating and serving seniors, that might be the first time that they've actually interacted with an older adult. So right. How in the world would we expect them to, as you were saying, you had that feeling of respecting and these special moments with the grandparents. But what we're seeing as generations that are coming out, those family circles and those experiences aren't necessarily ubiquitous to all of the other generations that are coming through. And so how can we share and find that common ground and understanding so it's not seen as an older adult is irrelevant or they don't deserve our respect?
Right.
How can we pull them into the fold so they have a better understanding so they're not just dismissed? And I think your experience is absolutely what I feel, and I know Francis feels. And I think you hit on something as a topic for us to continue exploring as just a side note, because I think it's something that we're right. seeing across the board.
Yeah.
The other thing that you said right in the very
these days, and again, it goes back to the pandemic. Like, think how people who did want to see their parents or grandparents couldn't suddenly, and that was so hard. I mean, a lot of seniors died, and just from loneliness. I mean, they just, and I don't want to say neglect, but nobody was able to really watch over them suddenly. We thought, well, they're in an apartment, in a community, but nobody could even knock on anybody's doors.
Right. Yes. The engagement, the isolation, all things that as a community, we're all looking for, whether it's be, age and technology, all different elements, right? Because we know that interaction is so incredibly important to the health, wellness, and longevity of our seniors.
Right. And touch is so important. I mean, even a simple hug. And I don't know if you know, there's a National Hugging Day, which is something I discovered recently. It's January 21st. And
did not know that. It's interesting.
And I would love for senior communities to promote that and figure out a fun way to make it, something where it's not just one day a year, that, they're promoting it daily in those communities.
I think I hear a challenge there.
Yeah.
Hug a senior.
Yeah. Yeah. It'll be on my Facebook page on January 21st.
I love it. I love it.
Yeah. Yeah.
The other thing you noted, Beth, was that a lot of people see what you do and who you are as a luxury, as a service that is for those that have disposable income. Can you hit on that a little bit of how one, change that perception, and I know you've got thoughts on that, and two, financially it is real, right? And so there is a cost involved in this, and sort of how you talk to folks about when we've got caregivers and loved ones and seniors themselves listening to this, about how can they use Beth Blacker, It's Just Stuff, as a resource to help them navigate this as we're transitioning into whatever this next phase may be.
Right. And, this goes across the board, not just for seniors, but for anybody who's truly struggling with too much stuff that, I don't, like you said, I don't believe it's a luxury. I believe it's a necessity, and it's unfair for society to say otherwise, because nobody, and I know I say this all the time, but nobody wakes up in the morning wanting to have any type of mental incapacitation or inability to function any more than somebody wants to wake up with cancer or heart disease or diabetes or anything that's debilitating. This is debilitating for people. And as a society, it's unfair for us to say, well, what's wrong with them? Why can't they just do it? It's just, going around your house and cleaning up. It's not that simple. It really isn't. And we really have to re-examine this as a society, or we're going to continue to burn through all of this money in healthcare and social services because people can't figure out how to do it on their own. It's not fair. I mean, and I draw the analogy all the time. I have an accountant. Why do I have an accountant? She's the expert in accounting. Why should I have to learn the tax code every year when there's somebody that goes to school to learn it and takes care of it for me in 15 minutes? But, something like what I do, it's not considered, it's considered a profession, but it's not considered one that would ever be covered by insurance. But why shouldn't it be? Why shouldn't we look at this as something that is impossible for somebody to do, especially if they have a diagnosed physical or mental issue? It's not fair to put that burden on people. And, when somebody has cancer, we get them treatment. Why can't we get somebody treatment for this? It should be something that a doctor can go to the insurance company and say, this person is incapable of getting out of their home or being able to manage the stuff that they have for these reasons, X, Y, and Z. Let's get them the help. And I would want to be overseen, obviously, by a medical professional who understands whatever the diagnosis is. But and I partner with a lot of therapists, but it doesn't mean that the therapist can necessarily get the financial resources for that person. So it would be lovely to see more grants. I would love to see the state of Colorado offer more grants through the different agencies that we have here. But it takes, somebody to really, come along and fight for it. So that may be me.
It's a preventative care component, right? I think, right? I think we are going to see a shift. I'm hopeful we'll see a shift in our healthcare society, one to treating diseases, right? Versus preventing, right? I think that's a combination of this goes into it, whether it's, mental health, physical health, emotional health, all that stuff. I think this ties into, we do a terrible job as a society about preventative stuff, right? We're great when you get struck by a bus or, any of those other trauma situations, man, we will knock it out of the park. Right.
Right. But we slap Band-Aids on everything else and hope that there's no bleeding that will come through. Kind of like my tires that they patch 3 times before they finally replace it. I'm like, what are you doing?
So as we're kind of close here, Beth, what are your 3 tips today for our audience that we can take some action on to kind of start this process here of maybe editing your life?
Right.
Super simple. Let's keep it simple. That's what I like to say.
Small chunks is my best advice. Take it
Okay.
in very, very small chunks. If one drawer is all that you can handle at a time, then just do one drawer. That's it. One cabinet, one, half of a closet, maybe just one category in your closet. Like one day make it your pants, the next day make it your shirts. And start to look around at the things that have just been sort of collecting that you didn't know what to do with, like all those little cords and little IKEA packets of screws and, all that kind of stuff. I promise you, you're never going to need it or use it again. You're just not, the straws, the packets of ketchup. I mean, they do accumulate. We had a client that, she insisted on keeping all the packets that she would get from takeout. And, whether or not she ever used it, I don't know, but it was a lot. It was a lot. So
start small. That is great advice.
Yeah, love it.
Really small. Yeah.
And Beth, for me, I know as we close up, what you really did for me, and my guess is others that are watching this, is you gave me permission. And you gave me permission today that, yes, I can do it all. I know how to go through and actually clean out closets and all of this stuff, but I don't have to. And it's okay to say that I can hire an expert to help me. And that doesn't mean that I'm weak. That doesn't mean I'm not capable. That doesn't mean I don't love myself or my parents. You gave me permission to do that and to hire It's Just Stuff to help me with something that will help my mental health, help me care for my mother better, help me show up better in the world. There's a service there. It's not a privilege just for those that have the money to do it. It actually is part of my my toolkit to help me show up better. And thank you for that.
You're welcome. And, it would be lovely to have sponsors who could help my clients that, really don't have the financial means, but I'll still work with somebody. I'll figure it out. I always do. I have a team of people. I can sometimes get volunteers. Does it mean that every job can be a pro bono job? No, of course not. But, I'll do my best. I always will. It might take more time because it means I have to fit somebody, a couple of hours here and there into my schedule. But, I do have a couple of members on my team that, understand how hard this is, especially for seniors, and are willing, to come and help when we really, really need it. So.
Well, that's awesome.
Yeah.
Beth, what's the best way? Is the website, it's just stuff.co, the best way to get in contact with you?
There's a contact form right on the homepage as well as another tab.
Well, we'll have all that in the show notes. Best website right here. It's just stuff.co is down below for those that are watching the video. It'll be in the show notes for those that are on a podcast. Beth, I can't thank you first off, one, for your passion. I mean that, for your passion and your dedication to just serving. I think that's as simple as to put it, is that you are a servant of others. And I applaud you for that. And
well, thanks. And I think that, again, it goes back to how I was raised and, not to get religious, but, I was raised Jewish, and there is a saying in Hebrew, tikkun olam, it means repair the world. And I think that we all have to embrace that.
Can you say that one more time? What is this phrase in Jewish again? Can you say that one more time?
In Hebrew, it's tikkun olam, and it means repair the world.
I love that. I love that.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
It should be the basis of humanity. And yet here we are.
It starts small though, right? It starts with us, right? It starts small, right? Yeah. And then Cambria, thank you. Any last parting words as we wrap up here?
No, this is a heck of a way to start a Friday.
Thanks.
Yeah. So Beth, thank you for what you do. Thank you for your willingness to serve others and even travel to Florida to do it. So it says a lot about you. And, I know this is going to have an impact on people. And I think at the end of the day, give yourself some grace. And I think that really matters. And, it's okay to not be okay as well too. And find those professionals that can help, whether it is accounting, which is awful, or it's organizing your house, which can be equally as awful. So yeah, give yourself some grace. And Beth, as always, we appreciate you taking some time on a Friday morning. Thank you for sharing your story, sharing your passion. And we look forward to staying connected and seeing how things unravel here in the year of 2024.
My pleasure. Thank you so much. Really appreciate it.
All right, Cambria, you and I for a second here in our little Maverick moments. What are your thoughts? What are you feeling after that? Kind of, yeah.
I think the most remarkable thing that stands out is that there's a lot of things that we can do in senior care in this longevity economy
Mhm.
about helping people raise awareness. And we can have the smartest and best and most efficient processes, but without marrying that with the humanity and the human experience of the services and the outcomes that we offer, we're just a bull in a china shop, and we might get to the right outcomes, but at what cost? And that isn't the way that any of us want to be treated. And I think
Yeah.
when we have guests and entrepreneurs like Beth that have a talent and a skill and they lean into it and then marry it with their humanity and respect for those outcomes, that's sort of that magic sauce. And then you also come up with how can we make this then accessible to those at most at need? And that's truly what's the inspiration behind those businesses. That is just like the triple threat to me. And yes, let's do more of that.
Yeah, I can't say any better than that. I think what we keep coming back to recurring themes of that we'll have to dive deeper into, right? Grace and acceptance and respect. I think a lot of our guests come back to that same root. And I think there's something there that we've got to start having a deeper discussion of how that actually is implemented a little bit broader, right? Because like I said, we're starting small, which is awesome. But it's
then
interesting.
I agree. And the other aspect that we all know, and here in America, we're, I think the poster children of what not to do in terms of being proactive and preventative care.
Right.
And we're seeing that across the board with weight loss, right? With the weight loss drugs that are coming out and insurance companies, not investing in them, or in gym memberships and all of these different things. But now that we've got the analytics behind a lot of this, it'll be interesting to see if that helps. We all know here that, yes, let's just avoid ever being in the hospital or having to be on medication or having to actually hire someone like Beth because we're already ahead of the game. Well, how can we start investing more and actually making that, giving people the right support? And I think the analytics and showing the outcomes is what we're going to see as a trend. And now that we've got access to a lot of that data of what really being proactive and preventative measures, and then how can we get, as Beth said, more grants, more programs to actually see these services as something as essential as the medication that they're getting. And by the way, at a lower cost and more and better outcomes for all of those companies who are providing it. And I think that's the bigger trend that we're going to start to see with all of this. And I think it's our job as thought leaders and trying to raise awareness is how can we help get those analytics, get the data, so we can actually show and prove and back up just the gut feelings we have with true data that will have a meaningful outcome.
Yeah. And speaking of that, I just want to I forgot about this article I read and then so the FDA last about a week ago, give or take, don't hold me to my timeline, they allowed the Florida government will be able to purchase prescription drugs in bulk from wholesalers in Canada.
Yes, I did see that.
I just was flabbergasted by that. Again, this data showing, right? When you get when you can do things preventative, proactively, it helps everybody, health insurance, the people themselves. So data is going to be really powerful, I think, here in the next, year or two as we really collect a lot of it. But if we don't have people to analyze it, that's the concern I have. We got all this data. What do we do with it?
What are we going to do with it? And what does it mean? And then having someone that's with big and bold and kind of throwing it out there that we're going to do this and everyone look out. And all of a sudden now everyone's paying attention. Correct. That will also drive change. Absolutely. So both sides.
And that leads us into our great guest we have next week. We have Jeff Gray from Age Tech Atlanta, who's going to give us a kind of a synopsis on CES, which is, I believe, is wrapping up today in Las Vegas. And he's going to kind of start talking a little bit about the trends that they saw from the tech component that's coming out. But I think as we're talking, it's not just tech, right? It's tech plus data. Then how do you use that data? So join us next Friday with Jeff Gray of Age Tech Atlanta. And until then, be kind. Give yourself some grace and pay it forward.